Tonight on Bridge City News, the town of Coaldale announced that its pool will be closing for the rest of the summer. Town officials will have the details. Some local restaurant owners are not big fans of the Skip the Dishes app. We will explain why. And we have another Movie Mill Minute featuring some great new movies you can look forward to seeing this weekend.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The community of Coaldale will need to find new ways to cool off this summer. The town decided to close its outdoor swimming pool for the rest of the 2019 season due to a broken filtration system that would be too costly to fix. Jeanette Rocher was in Coaldale today to get community reaction and find out what's in the future for the 47-year-old pool.
What began as a normal summer for the Coaldale pool has quickly turned out of the ordinary. On July 13th, it was discovered that the pool had a faulty filtration system and had to shut down temporarily. Since then, Town Council has been busy trying to figure out how much it would cost to fix the problem.
And the cost estimate was in the range of $190,000 to $300,000. And then that didn't include engineering. That we would, the very, very best case, we might be able to salvage 2 weeks of the swimming season with no guarantee that that would even happen. So for $2 or $3 or $4 or $500,000, council just didn't feel that that was the right way to treat Coaldale taxpayers' money.
They reached out to different communities, and the town of Sterling stepped in to say they could help accommodate the influx of Coaldale visitors. Likewise, the Palliser School Division said they would provide shuttle service to and from Sterling.
Ideally, we like to start it right away, but the first bus might not leave the parking lot until July the 29th.
The town says anyone who purchased a season pass or swimming lessons will get a refund. Craig also says they were able to retain all of their lifeguards, who will serve as extra supervision to and from Sterling.
I mean, Sterling's quite far from here, so probably won't take advantage of the shuttles.
My child is not even 1, so I don't think it affects me at this point, but down the road it would be nice to have, something. So I feel for the families who are affected.
Well, it's kind of disappointing because it's really hot outside and it's like sad because it's a good pool. It's good to have the pool closed because now people can go to the spray park.
You want people to come to the spray park instead of the pool?
Yeah.
It's disappointing, like my kids were saying, they went weekly, and so it's really sad that they can't use their swim pass. But hopefully they can update the pool and maybe get an indoor pool, because I think more people would use an indoor pool than an outdoor pool.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
A church in West Lethbridge along Heritage Heights has sustained $250,000 in damage from a fire. Lethbridge fire crews responded to a call at around 9:30 on Wednesday evening. The blaze, which originated from the kitchen, was determined to be accidental. Fortunately, there were no injuries. A new report says crops in all 3 prairie provinces have been damaged by hail this month. Companies and the Canadian Crop Hail Association are investigating 821 claims in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. More than half of those claims were made by farmers across Saskatchewan after storms resulted in damage ranging from minimal to heavy. Many of the storms produced pea to golf ball-sized hail that damaged cereals, pulse crops, and oilseeds. Each month, the Lethbridge Police Service will be recognizing someone from the Watch program who goes above and beyond the call of duty to give back to the community. BCN's Loris Alexander introduces us to the Watch program's Volunteer of the Month.
When you walk downtown Lethbridge, you just might find Jeff Cove making people smile.
I was retired for 5 years from the police service, and when I became aware of the Watch program, I'd heard about the program through the Veterans Association, but I thought this is a perfect opportunity to give back. During the time I was a police officer for the 29 years that I worked here, I held 11 different jobs. I started out as a constable, walking the beat, basically being a police officer, doing the same kind of walking stuff and building relationships and building trust and with the police and helping people out there, just like I do now.
Cove, no stranger to being recognized for outstanding service, was recently honored with the Volunteer of the Month title for the Watch program.
I was pretty surprised. So I was surprised. So Monday, I came in to do my shift at 10 o'clock. And I was quite surprised. They came in with a plaque and took my picture, and I was very surprised because for me, this is just doing something that I was trained to do.
Surprised and gracious with a simple message to share.
There's proof that there's something out there for everybody, that's something that everybody can do in their community, to give to their community, to make their community a better place, whether it's for a particular thing or a particular group of people. In this case, it's an opportunity to give back to the city, to the community, to the businesses, to the people who are underprivileged and marginalized.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
They are quick and convenient. Food courier services such as Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats have gained popularity in Lethbridge and across Canada. But as Naveen Day explains, some restaurants are not happy with the service.
Staying in is the new going out, and food couriers are a must-have for homebodies. Services like Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats have experienced exponential growth in recent years. Through an app on their smartphones, customers choose a restaurant and order their food. A delivery fee and optional tip are added to the bill, both of which go to the driver. But some restaurants are not happy with the service, saying they are experiencing problems with drivers and high costs that eat away at their bottom line.
Had a few problems with Skip the Dishes where the drivers will drop the orders because they see that their tips aren't big enough on them. It takes them a long time to get a lot of the food out, and that hurts our bottom line. We pay Skip the Dishes 25% of every sale, which is huge. There's not a lot of profit left over at the end of it, and there's not a lot of people coming into the restaurants because they enjoy using this app and staying at home.
Wilson says although the costs are high, the service does provide an opportunity for new restaurants to make a name for themselves and gain a share of the local market. Jason Austin, general manager for Italian Table, agrees, adding that the service allows him to focus on the business inside of the restaurant.
Skip the Dishes has helped us by really allowing our food to travel out the door, and once it leaves, it's in their hands. They look after the platform, they manage the customers. It really allows us to just focus on our business inside our doors.
Both restaurants say once you've enjoyed their food through delivery, they'd love to see you come through their doors and enjoy their atmosphere as well. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
If you plan to attend this weekend's Lethbridge Bulls game, make sure you bring along a tin for the bin. The Lethbridge Interfaith Food Bank will be collecting non-perishable food items at Saturday night's game for their annual Strikeout Hunger campaign.
If you bring in a non-perishable food item to the game, you'll get a discounted price in your ticket. Basically, it's a great way to support your local team and a local charity because all the proceeds will go to us, the Interfaith Food Bank. They did it last year too. There's a dunk tank and everything like that, so it's a good way to come out, bring a family, and have some fun. I know that it didn't do as great last year, so we're really trying to push it this year so that we can get all those people to bring in a food donation. As far as the target goes, I mean, if one person brings in a can, and you're looking at like a few thousand pounds, right? So definitely going to benefit a lot of families.
The defense says there is no evidence that a youth shot a German tourist in the head last summer west of Calgary. The teen, who is from the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, who cannot be identified because he was 16 at the time, is on trial for various charges, including aggravated assault. Closing arguments are scheduled to be heard on August 28th. Horace Steven was driving an SUV through the First Nation with his family when someone in a passing vehicle shot him. Steven survived, but the trial heard he's paralyzed on his right side, gets confused, and has memory issues. A court says part of our province's Mental Health Act is unconstitutional. It stems from a case of a Calgary man who was held in hospital for 9 months. The ruling says the Indigenous man was admitted to the Foothills Hospital in Calgary in September of 2014 after suffering injuries from a hit and run. After recovering for 20 days and showing improvement, he wanted to be released. Doctors, however, used the Mental Health Act to hold him, saying he was disoriented and did not understand his medical issues. Although he had no history of mental health problems, he was treated with medication and was not released until May of 2015, close to 9 months later. The court gave the government 12 months to rewrite the legislation. The Alberta NDP is calling on Premier Jason Kenney to kick a former leadership rival out of the UCP. The call comes after Alberta's election commissioner issued $70,000 in fines against Jeff Callaway for breaking fundraising rules. Opposition critic Heather Sweet says if Kenney does not boot Callaway out, then he's telling Albertans he tolerates illegal behavior inside of his party. Documents leaked earlier this year suggest Callaway ran a kamikaze campaign on behalf of Kenney, targeting Kenney's main rival, Brian Jean, before dropping out and throwing his support to the former federal cabinet minister. The Premier's Conference wrapped up recently in Saskatoon. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, was there covering the event. Brian noticed something interesting, and that Premier Jason Kenney and BC Premier John Horgan were slipping each other handwritten notes. He says it appears as though these guys may actually like each other.
Everyone expected these two guys not to get along at all, and other than on pipelines, I think they kind of do. They have respectful disagreements on the issue of pipelines in Trans Mountain, but otherwise, I think that they have been able to find a working relationship, which for the people of Alberta and for the people of BC, you have to hope that as they're dealing with each other, that they have this.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Lilly discussing the biggest issues from the Premier's Conference coming up in the second half of our show. The entire board of the People's Party of Canada in Winnipeg has resigned. Members claim the upstart party is being taken over by racists, anti-Semites, and conspiracy theorists. The board issued the resignation letter to Maxime Bernier, who founded the party after losing the 2017 Conservative leadership contest to Andrew Scheer. They argue the party attracted supporters who would deny freedoms to Canadians, close borders, and spread false information online. Many members are apparently encouraging Winnipeggers to vote for the Green Party in the fall. Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says if he becomes Prime Minister this fall, he will review the new Canada Food Guide. He called the document, which was released in January, flawed, and that the guide needs to reflect what science really tells us. That did not sit well with some nutrition experts who say it is one of the best food guides Canada's ever put out. The guide did away with traditional food groups and portion sizes and focused instead on broader guidelines, including eating more plant-based protein. Dozens of protesters rallied outside of a Liberal fundraiser in Victoria last night. They were calling for a stronger federal climate action plan. They also criticized Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for his government's approval and purchase of the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion.
I think Canadians right across the country, not just here on Vancouver Island, understand that we have to be protecting the environment. We have to be doing more to fight climate change, and that's exactly why, as a government, we have done more to fight climate change and protect the environment than any government in the history of the country. But we know there is always a lot more to do, and that's very much what we're focused on. Quite frankly, to be blunt with people on the TMX pipeline expansion, selling our oil to the United States at a discount, having 99% of our oil go to the United States, doesn't do anything for the environment when we're selling it at a discount. And putting the profits from the TMX into that green transition will do a lot for the environment.
Trudeau also talked about how his government is working with the BC government to make life more affordable for British Columbians. This followed a joint announcement with BC Premier John Horgan of $79 million to support 180 new transit buses across the province.
We know that people in BC have really been struggling with the high cost of gas prices, and it's something that the Premier and I have had a number of conversations about. We are pleased that there is an inquiry going forward. We've offered support from the National Energy Board to the inquiry to try and make sure that they're doing good work. As for future energy investments and refinery investments, we're always open to seeing what the private sector proposes, what business cases are out there. We believe in getting things done the right way, and we're going to work with people to find solutions to make sure that people can afford their weekly bills.
U.S. President Donald Trump says a U.S. warship destroyed an Iranian drone in the Strait of Hormuz amid heightened tensions between the two countries. Trump says it is the latest hostile action by Iran.
The Boxer took defensive action against an Iranian drone which had closed into a very, very near distance, approximately 1,000 yards, ignoring multiple calls to stand down, and was threatening the safety of the ship and the ship's crew. The drone was immediately destroyed. This is the latest of many provocative and hostile actions by Iran against vessels operating in international waters. The United States reserves the right to defend our personnel, our facilities, and interests, and calls upon all nations to condemn Iran's attempts to disrupt freedom of navigation and global commerce.
There are some great movies playing at the Mill this weekend, including Avengers Endgame. Here's another Movie Mill Minute.
Avengers Endgame. Adrift in space with no food or water, Tony Stark sends a message to Pepper Potts as his oxygen supply starts to dwindle. Meanwhile, the remaining Avengers must figure out a way to bring back their vanquished allies for an epic showdown with Thanos, the evil demigod who decimated the planet and the universe.
This is the fight of our lives.
This is gonna work, Steve.
I know it is. Because I don't know what I'm gonna do if it doesn't.
Men in Black International. The Men in Black have always protected Earth from the scum of the universe. In this new adventure, they tackle their biggest, most global threat to date, a double agent within their own organization.
It's gonna be fun. We'll have fun with it.
There should be a big red button around here somewhere.
Found it.
Looks like some fantastic movies once again. Another mild day in the Windy City, and the temperature is rising just in time for the weekend. All of the weather details are coming up. We have had some extreme weather across the prairies over the last few days. This was the scene yesterday afternoon around 5:30 p.m. northeast of Le Mans. The video was shot by Nick Cook. A funnel cloud appeared to touch down in a farmer's field. No reports of any damage or injuries. As for our region, no funnel clouds, but some wind mixed with a few clouds and fairly warm. Tonight, more clouds rolling in with a low near 9. Tomorrow, the clouds will be clearing out with a high near 22. Sunday, mainly sunny with a high expected near 26. Monday, lots of sunshine again with a high at 32. Expect highs near 32 and 33 Tuesday and Wednesday, and cooling off slightly to 31 degrees on Thursday. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 26 and an average low of 11. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1960 at 39 degrees, and the record low was 5 in 1996. Sunrise was at 5:45, sunset at 9:31. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, Victoria will be mainly sunny at 24, just a couple of degrees cooler in Vancouver at 22. A chance of thunder showers in 18 in Calgary tomorrow, light showers in 22 for Edmonton. Mainly overcast at 23 for Regina. A chance of showers at 22 for Saskatoon on Saturday. Rain at 24 for Winnipeg. Toronto had a severe thunderstorm warning earlier today. Tomorrow, more thunder showers expected and a high near 34. Showers and 32 for Ottawa. Expect 31 and rain in Montreal tomorrow. Mainly sunny at 34 for Fredericton, New Brunswick. Sunshine and 31 is on tap for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Clearing at 27 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, it should be mainly cloudy and a high near 18 degrees. The price of oil was up today as tensions escalated in the Persian Gulf region, where a fifth of the world's crude is shipped through. Iran says it has captured a British oil tanker and may have seized a second ship. That, along with U.S. President Trump saying a U.S. warship destroyed an Iranian drone, caused energy prices to rise today. Iran denied its drone was struck and says all of its unmanned aircraft in the region returned to base safely. Boeing says the fallout from the grounding of MAX jets will cut $5.6 billion from its revenue in the April through June quarter. The Chicago-based company is also putting aside $4.9 billion for possible compensation for airlines that had to cancel thousands of flights. The $5.6 billion hit to pre-tax earnings is more than half of Boeing's $10.5 billion profit for all of 2018. Boeing is still working on fixing flight control software that appeared to play a role in the crashes which killed 346 people off the coast of Indonesia and Ethiopia. 2 sheep flocks in central Alberta have been quarantined for scrapie. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says a diseased sheep lived on multiple premises, which resulted in a flock at a second farm being quarantined as well. All sheep that came in contact with that sheep will be tested, and those that do not have a genetic trait that would make them resistant to the disease will be put down. Scrapie is a fatal disease that affects the central nervous system of both sheep and goats and is related to mad cow disease. The Bank of Canada has cut the interest rate used in mortgage stress tests by 1/5 of a percentage point to 5.34%. It is the first change in 3 years in the 5-year mortgage rate test used to determine whether would-be home buyers would qualify. The test sees if potential home buyers would still be able to afford their mortgage payment if interest rates climb or they have less income. Home sales softened last year after Ottawa introduced new stress test rules aimed at taking off some of the risk out of the market. They have improved in recent months as mortgage rates have lowered. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the town of Coaldale has decided to shut down its pool for the remainder of the summer. The pool has been closed since July 13th as a result of a breakdown in its filtration system. Mayor Kim Craig says council decided against investing up to $300,000 to a 47-year-old pool in such a tight construction window, and it wasn't worth the financial risk. He said instead the town will reach out to the community to discuss long-term options. The town of Coaldale, meanwhile, will offer a shuttle service to the village of Sterling so residents can access their pool. A question was asked at the recent Premier's Conference in Saskatoon if there's a national unity crisis in our country. Find out which premiers said there was one and which one said there wasn't. Political journalist Brian Lilly has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come out and support a worthy cause. The Ogun School Nigeria fundraiser is an international dinner, art show, and auction taking place Friday, July 26th at 6 p.m. at the Southminster Church Hall. Enjoy delicious dinner with an exciting auction plus live entertainment. Tickets are $10 per person. Reserve your seat today by emailing folasobayaju@gmail.com or text 867-688-0066. Come out to Galt Gardens and enjoy Shakespeare in the Park 2019 every Thursday and Friday from now until August 9th. The Lethbridge Shakespeare Performance Society presents the action-packed and exciting play Macbeth. Suitable for all ages, shows are free with an opportunity to donate. Experience the timeless magic of one of Shakespeare's best-known plays. For more information, call Kate at 403-329-4568. The 22nd annual Joel Nicholas Arnoldson Memorial Charity Golf Tournament is taking place Friday, August 16th at Paradise Canyon Golf Resort. Green fees are $190 per person, with proceeds going towards the Green Acres Foundation, which provides quality and affordable housing for seniors. For more information and to register, call 403-328-1155. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
U.S. President Donald Trump was blasted by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau again recently, but not for signing a protectionist move that would hit Canadian industry fairly hard, but for another reason. To talk more about it is one of our regular contributors from Toronto, Brian Lilly. Brian, our Prime Minister had more of a problem with some of the recent Trump tweets. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, and this is confusing both for me on why the Prime Minister would comment on this issue and not the other, and why the media is asking him about one and not the other. And of course, the issue that he's commenting on, the issue that the media is asking him about, is about his tweets that people have described as racist against a series of Democratic congresswomen. They call themselves the Squad, a bunch of young, multicultural women who are the new face of the Democratic Party. And he basically said, if you don't like how America's running, you can leave. And so that's got Trump in a whole bunch of hot water. Everyone wants to know what different political leaders think about it. Look, that's fine. That's well and good. But as a Canadian, my main concern is that this week, the very same day the Prime Minister's commenting on that and saying, well, this isn't how we do things in Canada. Oh, wait, have you met Quebec in their Bill 21? The president is signing a new executive order expanding protectionist measures. So for any infrastructure project going forward, starting in 2020, it needs to be 75% made in America products. The steel and iron within those projects needs to be 95% sourced in America. That blocks our manufacturers, that blocks our producers from bidding on contracts. That's not how it's supposed to be. Not under free trade, but just like the issue that we talked about last week with the transit systems, be it rail or buses, and we've seen literally hundreds of jobs lost in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. Well, this is going to affect steel and mills in Edmonton, in Hamilton, in Nanticoke, in Montreal, across the country. This is going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on any company that is big into building infrastructure projects, be it Ellis Dawn or PCL or, yes, even SNC-Lavalin. Where's the Prime Minister on that?
But let me ask you something. Would it be any different, let's say, if Andrew Scheer was Prime Minister or maybe NDP leader Jagmeet Singh? Because Trump seems to do what Trump wants to do. You know, nothing can really stand in his way.
And there is some truth in that. But here's where I think that Justin Trudeau has fallen down. One, so there's the Buy America Act, which is the one that deals with the transit that we were talking about last week, and that dates back to, I think, 1954. And then there's the Buy American Act, which dates back to 1933, and that's what the new provisions fall under. And Obama increased the Buy America Act provisions, and Trump just allowed them to continue. Trump is now increasing the Buy American Act provisions. So look, we're used to dealing with not just Donald Trump, but Democrats and Republicans, both parties in the House, in the Senate, in the White House. You keep getting these protectionist measures. Normally, it's the job of the Canadian Prime Minister, whoever they are, whichever party, to stand up and try and strike a deal with the president. Justin Trudeau hasn't done that. When the Americans set out the priorities that they had for the renegotiation of NAFTA, they had all kinds of issues where they said, we want better access to the Canadian market in this area, in that area. We want our producers to have this special treatment and that special treatment. Our priorities were chapters on gender, on the environment, and on Indigenous rights. Nothing about getting better access for our manufacturers. And now we're back to this. This is why this is an ongoing problem with this Prime Minister and why he's failed to stand up. Would it be any different? I'm not sure. But I think either of those two gentlemen, Jagmeet Singh or Andrew Scheer, would do a better job at trying to at least attempt to negotiate with Donald Trump.
Brian, there was an interesting development which took place recently at the Premier's Conference. You spotted Alberta Premier Jason Kenney slipping a note to BC Premier John Horgan. What, are we back in high school here now?
It was a little bit like that. I was expecting, John Horgan to pass it down, and then somebody would write back, will you go out with me or something like that? Very grade school, very grade six sort of thing. But, everyone expected these two guys not to get along at all. And other than on pipelines, I think they kind of do. They have respectful disagreements on the issue of pipelines in Trans Mountain, but otherwise, I think that they have been able to find a working relationship, which for the people of Alberta and for the people of BC, you have to hope that as they're dealing with each other, that they have this. I can tell you, having covered these provincial meetings before, that quite often there's a lot of real tension with a certain premier. We'll call them hypothetically the Premier of Quebec and a lot of the others. Francois Legault actually gets along very well with all the premiers, and I would include Jason Kenney in that. He gets along famously with Ontario's Doug Ford. But yeah, during the closing news conference, just before Jason Kenney went off on the issue of national unity, I'm watching them, and they're passing notes back and forth and smiling. And by all accounts, from people that I talked to behind the scenes, very good working relationship, except on the issue of pipelines to the coast.
Yeah, that's a major stumbling block right there. We have to work on the pipelines. The little no passing is fine and dandy, but we got to get that pipeline built here. Now, at the same Premier's Conference, Kenney backed up Saskatchewan's Scott Moe and said that national unity is under threat. Now, you have been a political watcher for a number of years like myself. Is Kenney right? I know many here in Alberta are feeling isolated from the Trudeau Liberals right now.
No, I think Kenney is absolutely right. And just before that, I had asked Francois Legault at the closing news conference last Thursday, I said, why is it okay to take equalization money that is generated by Alberta Oil, but not take Alberta Oil? And he didn't have a good answer. And so the last question in the news conference was by a reporter from Canadian Press who said, I'd like to hear from all of you. And there were 12 because PEI's premier had left. So there's 12 of them, and we'd like to hear from all of you. Can you tell us if you agree with Scott Moe that national unity is under threat? Scott Moe passed and said, I'll let them all react to what I said, and what I said stands. To a man, they all said, no, national unity's fine, it's not under threat. And then Jason Kenney said the opposite. Jason Kenney said, yes, it is under threat, and went to that very pipeline issue that we were talking about and actually quoted myself back to the room saying, why is it okay to take the oil money but not the oil? He was clearly frustrated, and he was expressing the frustrations of many Albertans and Saskatchewanians, people that I talked to last week while I was out there. And whether you're talking to the guy in the restaurant who's working there, or the farmer, or the guy working in media or business in downtown Saskatoon, the feeling was the same. a feeling of frustration, a feeling of alienation, a feeling of the center of the country does not care about us. And if that doesn't change soon, either by a change in attitude by the current government or a change in government, then things will get worse, and separation is on the agenda. And nobody says that that's what they want, but that's where they're at.
Brian, just before he flew out to the Calgary Stampede, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Montreal to take part in the nomination of one of the many anti-pipeline activists that he has recruited to run for the Liberals. So how do we believe that Justin Trudeau is pro-pipeline when he pulls moves like this?
Yeah, Stephen Guilbeault is a guy that I covered years and years ago in Montreal. Extreme left-wing environmental activist, wants no pipelines, wants all the oil to stay in the ground, and will not apologize for that, will not stand with Liberal Party policy, which the Prime Minister says includes building Trans Mountain Pipeline. He's not the only guy that's been recruited like this in Alberta, and yet the PM does this, and then, by the end of Stampede is out there. He's up in Edmonton with a bunch of roughnecks saying, "Oh, we're for you." And then he's down at the Stampede. Now, he didn't go to the Stampede grounds. He went to some pancake breakfasts and, avoided anyone that wasn't at a Liberal Party event. But he's trying to have it both ways, and he simply cannot. He has far more support in Quebec for his anti-pipeline view than he does in Alberta for buying the Trans Mountain Pipeline. He gets more support in downtown Vancouver, in the Lower Mainland, for his anti-pipeline views than he gets support in Alberta. And so do the math and you figure out where he's going to land on this sort of thing. I've told you, despite him saying that Trans Mountain Pipeline will be built, I don't believe it. We're now mid-July. I have not seen any evidence of anything happening. Other than a lawsuit starting that is backed up by the group EcoJustice. So that's where I think that it's going to continue. And then we're going to head into the election campaign and watch what Justin Trudeau says, not only in Quebec, but in particular in French in Quebec, as compared to what he says in English in Western Canada.
Ryan, there appears to be some confusion over Canada's new drunk driving laws. Some of it was caused by the Justice Department itself, but also by cases like a BC woman that you say was accused of drunk backyarding. What is that all about?
Yeah, well, that drunk backyarding is my term. And I hope it catches on because, look, any of us that have a drink or two after work could be charged with drunk backyarding. And this started at the beginning of July. The Justice Department put out a tweet that said, with the changes in our law, be aware that you are guilty of drunk driving if you have blood alcohol above the legal threshold up to 2 hours after you have stopped driving. And a lot of people got upset at that. Well, it was in the law. I warned about this, as the law was being debated and said, look, here's one of many problems with this law. Bill C-46. This is the accompaniment act to Bill C-45 that legalized cannabis. This was just supposed to be about adding cannabis and drug driving to our drunk driving laws, but instead they made a whole series of changes. And so under the changes, you are guilty of an offense if you are intoxicated by drugs or alcohol up to 2 hours after you stop driving. And so in my first column I wrote on this, Hal, I quoted from sections 253 and 254 of the Criminal Code. And it's black and white that that's what the law now says. And people would argue with me and say it's not possible. And besides, even if it is, it'll never happen. And then people started sending me the story of a woman named Leanne Lowry. She is from Nanaimo, BC. She was visiting Maple Ridge on the mainland. She had to go for a medical appointment, goes for a medical appointment. Her and her boyfriend drive to a local pub. They stop at a pub. They have one drink. Then they leave the pub at 3:30, go visit her sister where they're going to be staying for the night, and they're having a family event in the backyard. She has a couple more drinks at 5:30. The RCMP call, say, oh, something's happened. We need to talk to you. She thinks that there's a problem with her family. Something horrible's happened. She tells the Mounties where she is. They call her at 6 and say, we're outside on your sister's driveway. She goes out. There's 5 RCMP officers there, and they tell her that she's being charged with drunk driving. She's got to blow into a breathalyzer. She's been sitting in her sister's backyard at this point for 2.5 hours and says, I've just finished a drink. I'm going to blow over. And they said, well, it doesn't matter. she ended up having to go through the court system, out $5,000, and still trying to fight to clear away all of this, even though she is not guilty. So don't tell me that this can't happen. It already has, and it's an unconstitutional intrusion into the daily lives of Canadians that the government never should have gone ahead with.
Brian, most families in Canada have had to deal with the terrible disease cancer, but most don't have family members who are cabinet ministers who can get free flights aboard private jets to visit top doctors. Tell me about the latest ethics questions surrounding Dominic LeBlanc.
Dominic LeBlanc has been in ethic problems several times, going back several years, back when he was in the Chrétien days. He was found to be in a conflict of interest with the Irving family, who he's very close to, very powerful family in New Brunswick, well, across Canada, but in particular in New Brunswick. He's been found to have violated the ethics rules by giving a lucrative clam fisheries license to a relative of his wife. Most recently, media investigations looking at the appointment of judges closely tied to him, friends, donors, family members. And now he said, well, I took a flight from Moncton to Montreal to go see a cancer doctor. Now, this happened just days before. If y'all remember, back in April of this year, he announced he was dealing with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and he was stepping away for treatment. Very treatable form of cancer, but he needed to relieve himself of his cabinet duties, so Bill Morneau took those over while he was getting treatment. June 13th, just days before he announced, I'm better, I'm clear, and I'm going to run in the next election, he was on a private jet owned by J.D. Irving Limited. The same family he's been tied to before, that's gotten him in trouble before. He flew on their private jet from Moncton to Montreal to go see a top cancer doctor with his wife, who's a sitting judge, who, by the way, could end up hearing cases involving the Irvings, one of the biggest companies. I mean, it's the Irvings and McCains in New Brunswick. You are at some point going to hear a case involving them. So there's a lot of questions around this, both about his judgment on this and on the judgment of his wife, a sitting judge. But on top of that, the ethics commissioner said he pre-cleared it and said it was okay because the doctor said he should go to Montreal and, well, his immune system is compromised because of the cancer treatment. You're going to run an election where you're going to be glad-handing people, but you can't take your car to Montreal. You can't take a flight. You've got to get on the Irving's private jet. There are a lot of problems with this, considering the number of contracts that the Irvings get, considering that there's questions about them involving the Mark Norman trial. There's questions about the Irving company when it comes to calling up reporters and threatening them when journalists ask questions of the government about the contracts they've given to the Irvings. And now you've got a cabinet minister on their private jet. That is an ethics violation, if ever there was one. And the Liberals are just trying to whistle past it.
Award-winning journalist and political junkie Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
Living in Canada, we do at times face challenges in living out our Christian faith, but compared to what takes place in other nations around the world, we have so much to be thankful for. Today, we're going to hear some stories of Christians going through incredible difficulties, and we'll also hear what we can do in our part to help them out. Joining me now via Skype is Greg Musselman, spokesperson for Voice of the Martyrs. Welcome back to BCN, Greg.
Good to be back with you, Hal.
Now, you were in Nigeria recently. You had a chance to speak with some individuals who've endured incredible persecution. Can you share a little bit of the experience with Lena, a 13-year-old who is from the daughter of a Muslim imam who decided that she wanted to follow Jesus?
Yeah, and this is kind of the cool thing that, we hear so many stories of the death and destruction and the attacks against the church in Nigeria, and certainly that is true. But one of the ministries that we work with down in Nigeria, they have a safe house there. And so I was able to meet some of the young folks that were a part of the safe house. And, when you think of a safe house, it can be an apartment in Cairo, Egypt, kind of secluded. In this case, it's a compound. I can't see the area. We just don't want to put Lena and the others in danger. In fact, that's not even her real name. But as a 13-year-old, she was, observing Christians in her community and started to have some questions and saw that their lifestyles were different than some of the other people that she knew in her Muslim community. And so she started to ask questions. And as the more questions she asked, the more curious she got, and to a point where she said, you know what, I'd like to go to church. And she went to church, heard the message of God's love through his son Jesus, and said, I want to follow him. Now, she went home and talked to her father, as you mentioned, an imam, Islamic teacher. And immediately he wasn't that concerned. He thought, okay, well, she just has a few questions, but he was really not able to answer any of those questions. So she started to pursue even more and just came to the point that Jesus was true. He was the Son of God. He died for her sins, and she wanted to have a relationship with him. And then it didn't go so well with her father at that point. He actually became very abusive, and her life at that point was in very much danger.
You know, Greg, it's hard to imagine someone that young having the determination to endure this kind of thing and to persevere to find freedom. How is this young 13-year-old doing right now?
She's actually doing very well. I mean, she was in a situation where she was put into a forced marriage, a man that was much older and also had another wife. And can you imagine, a 13-year-old girl, and I've got 3 daughters, and I just can't even imagine, my daughters being in a situation like that. Obviously, I would never put them in that situation. But she was, forced into this marriage. It was at that time that she determined to run away. She was actually caught a couple of times, then eventually did get to some safety and to some Christians that were able to take her eventually to the safe house. Now, when she went there, she couldn't speak Xhosa, which is the language of her tribe in that area, couldn't speak English, and was illiterate, knew nothing about the Bible. The thing that I found so interesting, Hal, is that after just a year or two being in the discipleship school, she's now speaking a little bit of English. Xhosa is, she's able to write in that now. She could, of course, understand it. And she's reading the Bible. And she's really come to an understanding that, if you do come into a relationship with Jesus, there's going to be persecution. Of course, us in the West, we don't often have to endure that. There may be some marginalization, some of the things they're going through in Canada, but not to the extent where your very life is at stake. So she's really, really doing well. She's also learning a trade and, learning how to sew. We saw the sewing school there. And her desire is to go back into her community as a pastor when she's trained through the, through the safe house and then into the Bible college, and then go back into her community and share the love of Jesus. So she's doing great. I was very, very impressed with, her, the way that she's just so passionate about God's kingdom and, again, desiring to see her people come into a relationship with Jesus.
Now, there's also a very real threat from Fulani herdsmen in Nigeria. Can you explain to our viewers what this group is, what they're all about, and what's their motivation to keep killing?
Right. Now, we've all heard of the Boko Haram. They're a very violent terrorist Islamic group in Nigeria and then some of the surrounding countries as well. We've heard of the Chibok girls, the 276 girls that were kidnapped several years ago at a school. Still more than 100 of those girls remain in captivity. Many have been forced into marriages, those kinds of things. So the Boko Haram are one of the most dangerous groups. They're affiliated with groups like Islamic State and some of the other notorious groups that we've heard about in Islamic terrorist groups. So we've heard of them, we know them. But interestingly enough, and sadly really, is the Fulani herdsmen have actually caused the death of more Christians and more people than even the Boko Haram. They're kind of a nomadic group. They are, they have their cattle and they graze through the land, and often they'll go through the land of the Christians. Now, in the northern part of the country where they're primarily located, there's been famine and difficulty there. So they've been coming, further into the south, into what's called the middle belt of Nigeria. And they go through much of the land of the Christians, because many of the Christians are landowners in that part of the world. And if the followers of Jesus, complain or say, what are you doing on our land? They often will then use that to spark violence. They will use, of course, religion. You're infidels. This land belongs to us. So as the Christians say anything, then they're under attack, and whole villages have been attacked, and these Fulani herdsmen take over the land. So that's kind of their motivation, different than the Boko Haram. They're both Islamic groups that are very violent. And so the Christians, and especially in that part of the world, if it's not from the Boko Haram, it's from the Fulani herdsmen, who have actually caused more chaos for the Christians in places like Kaduna State.
Now, you recently interviewed some Nigerian widows who lost both children and husbands to the violent attacks of the Fulani herdsmen. What was that like?
Well, there's thousands of, widows in northern Nigeria. And again, I think most people are somewhat aware, Nigeria, which is the largest country in Africa, at least population-wise. In the north, it's mostly Muslim. In the south, it's mostly Christian. And then you've got the Middle Belt Plateau State and some of those states that are in the middle. So you kind of have a, 50% Christian, 50% Muslim or thereabouts. In the north, there are, of course, there are Christians, and there's Muslims in the south. But in places like Kaduna State, Kano, and some of those spots, it's very dangerous for the Christians. So the Fulani herdsmen, again, as they're grazing the land, go in and it causes all sorts of havoc for the Christians. So two of the ladies that I met, and just two of the thousands of widows, Christian widows, Victoria and Janet, both lost family members, both lost their husbands. One lady lost a couple of her nephews. Victoria lost two sons as a result of that. And then many have struggled badly. So again, this is Fulani herdsmen wanting to take the land, and they're in a very precarious position because where do they go? It's a dangerous part of that country, and so even if they go to other communities, they're still in danger.
So how do these Christians continue to live in such a precarious situation? This would naturally cause anger. Have they somehow been able to extend forgiveness to their attackers?
Well, it's interesting that one of the ladies that I talked to, Janet actually, and she said how she knew that she had forgiven because, we talk about it. We know what Jesus said, Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies. Okay, well, somebody offended me at work, or a neighbor, built his fence, on my part of the land or whatever. We deal with all sorts of things, and we need to be as Christians forgiving. But to loving your enemies, especially those that have killed a family member or family members or friends, that's another thing. But as Janet said, the reason she knew that she had forgiven is because when the Fulani herdsmen were in a situation where the weather was really bad and they had nowhere to go, and they asked if they could, stay with Janet and her family, and she said yes, they could. So she knew at that moment that she'd forgiven. Now, everybody is different, as they are here in Canada and other places where the persecution or difficulty is not as intense. We all need to forgive, and they're all at different levels. But I found many of these women, because of the strength of the preaching in the church, it's not fluffy sermons for sure. It's about loving your enemies and forgiveness and those things. So in the middle of all that, they are able to forgive, and then that opens up the door to be able to share the message of Jesus.
Now, Christian organizations like the one you're involved with, Voice of the Martyrs, are providing training for the widows left behind to help provide for their families. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, one of the things that we have learned, and I think many mission organizations around the world, is that it's very important that we just don't pour money into a situation. Certainly resources are important, but and again, if it's an emergency situation where homes have been burned down, they have nothing to eat, well, certainly emergency has to be there. We have to provide that emergency aid at that moment that it's needed, whether it's rebuilding homes, getting food supplies in, medical, absolutely. But long term, and that's real part of what Voice of the Martyrs is about, is being able for these widows to be able to sustain themselves over the long term. So microloan projects, making purses and making soap, or some of the ladies that I talked to there. And what that does is it creates an income for them, because they don't have the same kind of social welfare system that we do here in Canada. If the husband is killed, many cases that really eliminates the possibility of getting any income in the home. So the women need to now work and to try to support their family. And in many cases, they have large families, at least larger than our families here in Canada. And so to be able to have a job where they're able to make something and use their hands and their skill set to do that, they're able then to get resources, and they can send their children to school. They can, improve their homes, and in some cases to repair the roofs on their homes that have been destroyed because of these attacks. And that way that they're feeling self-supporting. And in the middle of all that, then they have that self-esteem is, yes, we've been helped by Christians in Canada, organizations in Nigeria and around the world, so that they can feel good about themselves. But they're so appreciative of, when I was there, to say thank you to the Canadians and thank you to the people that have helped us out, because now we're able to continue on, and we know that we have an army of people behind us, praying and supporting us.
Now, why does the Nigerian government not better provide security for Christians impacted by this?
Well, that's a good question, and I know that question is asked by, communities all around Nigeria, especially when we hear of these attacks. And it seems that often the Christians and others, I'm not just Christians, you have to understand, it's anybody that doesn't go along, especially when it comes to the Boko Haram and their ideology of making not only the North under Sharia law, but the whole country, and then eventually all of Africa. That's their agenda. So anybody that gets in the way of that, is in their crosshairs and can be attacked. But the Christians are isolated in that sense and attacked because they are Christians. They're not Muslim, and they will be given opportunity to convert to Islam or be killed. The government of Nigeria has improved somewhat in security over the last few years, But even again, there was a year ago, a bunch of girls, dozens of girls were taken again in the northern part of the country. And, fortunately, many of them were able to get back to their homes. But the question is, okay, well, where was the government? Especially when there's, information coming out that there's going to be an attack, these kinds of things. Where is the government? And so that's the question. In some areas, the government seems to be protecting, the innocent people in these villages. The challenge, too, is the overwhelming part of the Boko Haram and the various places they're attacking. It's hard for the government to get their military and police in those situations at all times. And then other times, to be honest, it appears that the government is turning a blind eye, and in some ways they're just allowing the Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen to go in and do whatever they want.
Okay, Greg, let's leave Africa for just a moment here. Let's talk about what's transpiring in Asia, specifically China. I understand they've been shutting down underground churches there?
Yeah, well, they've been, after the underground churches for a long time, Hal, and because of the growth of Christianity in China, and now you've got a new regime, President Xi, that his goal is to eradicate Christianity. Now, you and I know that that's not going to happen. In fact, when the communist revolution came in, the Chinese Revolution back in 1949, there was like 1 million or so Christians. The church really went under persecution. The thing that happened through that, and again, these are maybe conservative numbers, more than 100 million, 150 million Christians in China today. So the communist government sees Christianity as being against their agenda, against what they want in the understanding of the state and the ideology. That's what you really worship. That's what you are about. So Christianity points people in a different direction, into relationship with Jesus, and Jesus is who we worship. So the underground church has been under scrutiny and under attack, and pastors have been arrested and died in prison, and all those things have happened for decades in China. More recently, they have stepped it up and have really gone hard at the underground church. Now, what they've even going now is happening is, you probably heard of the crosses, thousands and thousands of crosses being removed in churches all across China. And that has been geared more towards the government-sanctioned church, or the Three South Patriotic Church, where they are given, license to operate. They have been sanctioned by the government, but now even the government is going after those house or the government churches as well as the house churches. Wow. So they're really, going hard at all Christians, regardless if they're, sanctioned or unsanctioned.
Does outside pressure coming from citizens from Western countries like Canada and the United States produce any positive results for persecuted Christians in China?
It does, but as we know that in the United States, there's a trade war going on with China. So that is not at the top of the agenda. Now, the current administration in the United States, has said that they're making human rights very important. And we know that evangelical Christians have had a lot of influence on the last election. And certainly their desire is, as ours is to help the Christians in China. And the same in Canada. Now, we've got a situation right now as well where there's dispute with the Chinese government, with Huawei. And so with the executive that was arrested, and then some Canadians were arrested, and it's a sort of a tit for tat situation. Mm-hmm. And so human rights is not at the top of the agenda. Now, one of the people that we work with, his name is Bob Fu. He founded an organization called China Aid. He is in the United States, and he actually spoke to the U.S. Senate. And I asked him, I said, okay, well, what kind of receptivity did you get there? Were they open to what you had said? He said, absolutely. They are concerned about human rights violations. But unfortunately, with all the other things that are in play, with the trade wars and the sanctions and the tax and all the kinds of things that are going on, it's very difficult for both our government and also the government of the United States to put a lot of pressure on China. But they're trying to do that. But again, you've got a lot of politics taking place here.
Greg, we've only got a few short moments left here. What can we do as Christians to help our brothers and sisters in China?
The most important thing is to pray. And again, I mean, it sounds almost like, well, yeah, of course, we need to pray. But really, we do. They are committed to praying. If you've ever been amongst Chinese Christians, whether it's in Canada or in China or wherever they are intense about prayer. They say that's the most important thing we do. And as we pray, the Lord will then, I believe, give us the wisdom of what we do next, whether that is, getting involved with an organization like the Voice of the Martyrs, whether it's Nigeria or Pakistan or China. So you can go to our website, vomcanada.com, and you can find out the things that are going on. And then Beyond Prayer, it's still, getting aid and help into there. Believe it or not, there's still need for Bibles, and especially in some of the rural communities, because, millions of Bibles are being printed in the country, but it's still difficult for them. But certainly to be praying, that's the number one thing, and then as the Lord directs us.
Greg Musselman, spokesperson with Voice of the Martyrs, thanks so much for joining me today from St. Albert.
Thank you very much, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great day.